And one thing that I wanted to talk to you was when you're tracking this innovation and inventions, uh, how did it shift from the British era to the American era, right? Because obviously, there's a significant shift in the late 1800s to the 1900s, where innovation, the center of the universe really was the British, right, empire. And then, with so much of action happening in the 16th, 17th, and the 18th century, so many things get invented, and then the shift happens to the US. And have you kind of studied that, and have you looked at how did that shift happen in spite of so much of melting pot of thinking happening in the British Empire?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a sense of how it happens, but I'm not like totally sure. So I'll tell you what my kind of hunch is, if you like. Is certainly over the course of, I'd say, the early 19th century, the center of gravity starts to dissipate. In fact, let's go back even further. At first, and let's zoom in beyond country level. At first, in the late 16th century, it's almost entirely happening in London. So in a particular, quite small city in 1550s, about 50,000 people, right? Pretty tiny. That grows very rapidly to about 200,000 people in 1600, 575,000 people in 1700. So massive change. London is very much, I think, the center of activity in terms of inventive activity for that very early period. After 1700, it starts to spread out of London. So it spreads into other parts. Where would it spread most naturally? Probably the same country, right? People speak the same language. They're moving around the same country pretty easily. So you start to see places like Birmingham. You start to see places like around the kind of Welsh borders region, around Shropshire, in the Midlands. So the places are in and around Birmingham, in Lancashire, in the northwest, so in and around Manchester and Liverpool, in the southwest around Bristol, in the north around northeast around Newcastle, even the northwestern extent, so very distant Cumbria, where there's not that many people. You start to see quite a lot of inventive activity taking place as well, and of course in Scotland, particularly in the belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So you start to see this kind of shift of not just industrial activity, but inventive activity outside of this particular city. And then from those cities, it starts to shift outwards again as well, right? Because a lot of the industrial activity that's taking place is going to start moving to where it's most efficient to do those things. And especially as you get more developed areas, in the sense of they get higher and higher wages, it gets harder and harder. As we see even today, manufacturing starts searching for the cheapest people to employ, right? It doesn't want to spend that much money if it can. Cheaper resources, lower wages to pay. So you start to see that movement already out of London, as a lot of these industries start searching for the lowest costs, or at least the best kind of better infrastructure and so on as well. And with that, you also get a lot of infrastructure building in Britain that makes more and more parts of the British economy more and more integrated as well. Canal building, railway building later on, road improvement, which is often not as noticed, river navigation, so taking existing rivers, making them navigable by boat, so that you can improve connections between different towns and cities. A lot of that is spurred on by this, as people start to think, how can I connect this all up, not only to London, but to these newer centres as they're springing up? And then from there, it starts to move even further outwards. So that's when you start to see a lot of artisans, a lot of manufacturers, a lot of inventors emigrating to what becomes the United States. You see a lot of them, even very early on, moving to France. It's as early as the 1710s, end of the 1710s, that Britain bans the emigration of skilled artisans in various different industries, where it already has a bit of a technological lead, particularly iron, particularly watchmaking, particularly tool making. They're worried because the French are, they're sending basically spies, industrial spies, to Britain to round up as many workers as they can with these skills and bring them over to France. Right, so that's pretty early, right? 1710s. Already it suggests the French are interested. The Russians are sending apprentices over as well, and that's pretty distant too, to learn in British factories and then hopefully bring that stuff back. And the Russians manage it very badly because they bring back these apprentices and then they completely get ignored, or they stop paying them. I mean, they just totally fail to learn a lot of these skills. And it's a much bigger language gap as well. And just bigger distances, and also it's just harder. The greater the distance, the harder it gets. But you do start already to see this diffusion into the rest of Europe of a lot of that invention, that kind of push for improvement. And I think there are kind of other locations which already have kind of lots of groups of inventors. Like even early on, Britain itself, London benefits from the Dutch revolt. There's a mass movement of people from what is today Belgium, which is a very rich part of the country, to the Netherlands, but also into Britain. You also likewise, during the Reformation, a lot of Italian Protestants, they don't want to be in Southern Europe with the Inquisition. So a lot of talented people leave to Northern Europe. They come to Britain as well. So this is a very old story of inventors going wherever they're going to have the best critical mass. But London for a long time is like the Silicon Valley of the 16th, 17th centuries. It is one of the lodestones that's attracting everyone. And then that spreads out. And then, you continue to see this, right? Like, think of, in India, you've got Tata, right? Tata, I think he went and trained in Britain for a long time.
Absolutely.
And then came back and brought a lot of the technology with him. I know that there's a Jamaican version of Tata, like another guy who came to Britain, was like, we don't have any of this back home. Let's start a factory. Let's bring all this stuff over and start, there's no reason we couldn't do this at home. And they think this is a great idea. You see the same with a lot of Japanese engineers were sent to Germany, to Britain, to France, to America in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. They came back, not just bringing skills, but bringing that kind of, the improving mentality almost kind of gets like, redone in kind of new cultural social contexts, right? In terms of the kinds of movements that they have, the kinds of ways that they interpret it. And so, for much of the 19th century, it's the story first of the spread to Europe and the Americas, but also already starting, I think, to go even further afield as well. Okay. And that's the story, I think, of the last few hundred years, is it's just continued to spread. Today, invention, I think, is pretty global. We've reached a stage where different industries can be super high-tech in a particular country, which you'll not find in any other country, because most cities are massive, but they also have these critical masses of people doing amazing things.